Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into a topic that every physician must master: hypercalcemia. I call this lecture Calcium Crisis because when calcium goes high, the clinical consequences can be dramatic. Let's get started. Before we begin, please note that this content is for educational purposes only. Clinical decisions should always be based on individual patient assessment and current guidelines. This lecture is designed to enhance your understanding, not replace clinical judgment. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to define hypercalcemia and its severity classifications, identify the major causes with a focus on the two that account for over 90% of cases, recognize clinical manifestations using a memorable framework, apply a systematic diagnostic approach, and finally, implement evidence-based treatment strategies. Let's start with the basics. Normal total serum calcium ranges from 8.5 to 10.5 milligrams per deciliter. But here's what's critical. Calcium homeostasis depends on three key organs working in concert. The bone serves as the calcium reservoir. The kidney regulates excretion, and the intestine handles absorption. Parathyroid hormone and vitamin D are the master regulators orchestrating this balance. Now, how do we classify severity? Mild hypercalcemia is 10.5 to 12 milligrams per deciliter. Moderate is 12 to 14 milligrams per deciliter. And severe, which is a medical emergency, is anything above 14 milligrams per deciliter. Remember, symptoms don't always correlate with levels, but severe hypercalcemia demands immediate intervention. Here's your first clinical pearl. Two causes dominate hypercalcemia. Primary hyperparathyroidism and malignancy together account for over 90% of all cases. Primary hyperparathyroidism is typically seen in outpatients with mild, chronic elevation. Malignancy-associated hypercalcemia presents in hospitalized patients with severe, acute elevation. This distinction will guide your initial approach. Let's expand our differential. We divide causes into PTH-mediated and non-PTH-mediated. PTH-mediated causes include primary hyperparathyroidism, which is most commonly due to a parathyroid adenoma, lithium therapy, and familial hypocalciuric hypercalcemia. Non-PTH-mediated causes include malignancy through various mechanisms, vitamin D excess, granulomatous diseases like sarcoidosis, medications including thiazides, and conditions with high bone turnover such as hyperthyroidism and immobilization. Now for the classic mnemonic that you'll never forget: stones, bones, groans, and psychiatric overtones. Stones refers to kidney stones and nephrocalcinosis. Bones refers to bone pain and osteoporosis. Groans encompasses the gastrointestinal symptoms like constipation, nausea, and pancreatitis. And psychiatric overtones includes confusion, depression, and in severe cases, coma. Let's explore each system in detail. The kidney is particularly vulnerable. Hypercalcemia causes nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, leading to polyuria and polydipsia. Patients develop nephrolithiasis, typically calcium oxalate or calcium phosphate stones. Chronic hypercalcemia leads to nephrocalcinosis, which is calcium deposition in the renal parenchyma. If untreated, this progresses to chronic kidney disease. The kidney damage can become irreversible. Gastrointestinal symptoms are common and often the presenting complaint. Constipation occurs due to decreased smooth muscle contractility. Nausea, vomiting, and anorexia are frequent. Peptic ulcer disease risk increases. And acute pancreatitis can occur in severe cases. Neurologically, patients experience fatigue, weakness, and cognitive dysfunction. Severe hypercalcemia causes lethargy, confusion, and can progress to stupor and coma. The heart is also affected. The classic ECG finding is a shortened QT interval due to shortened ventricular repolarization. Hypertension may develop. In severe cases, arrhythmias can occur, and there's increased sensitivity to digitalis toxicity. Chronic hypercalcemia can lead to vascular and valvular calcification. Always get an ECG in significant hypercalcemia. Let's talk diagnosis. Step 1. Verify the calcium is truly elevated. Repeat the measurement. Then, correct for albumin using this formula. Corrected calcium equals measured calcium plus 0.8 times the quantity of 4 minus the patient's albumin. Alternatively, measure ionized calcium directly, which is the physiologically active form. Rule out spurious causes like prolonged tourniquet time or hemoconcentration. Here's the key diagnostic pivot. Check the PTH level. This single test divides your differential into two clear pathways. If PTH is elevated or inappropriately normal in the face of hypercalcemia, you're dealing with PTH-mediated causes, primarily hyperparathyroidism. If PTH is appropriately suppressed, meaning low, you're looking at non-PTH-mediated causes like malignancy, vitamin D excess, or granulomatous disease. Let me walk you through the complete algorithm. Start with confirmed hypercalcemia. Check PTH. If PTH is high, consider primary hyperparathyroidism and check 24-hour urine calcium to rule out familial hypocalciuric hypercalcemia. If PTH is low, measure PTH-RP to evaluate for humoral hypercalcemia of malignancy. Also check vitamin D metabolites, 25-hydroxyvitamin D for exogenous intake, and 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D for granulomatous disease or lymphoma. This systematic approach will identify the cause in nearly all cases. Treatment depends on severity and symptoms. For mild, asymptomatic hypercalcemia, observation and addressing the underlying cause may suffice. Moderate hypercalcemia requires more active management. Severe hypercalcemia, above 14 milligrams per deciliter, or any symptomatic hypercalcemia, is a medical emergency requiring immediate intervention. Let's discuss each scenario. For mild hypercalcemia, the approach is conservative. Ensure adequate hydration with oral fluids. Avoid aggravating factors. Discontinue thiazides, limit calcium and vitamin D supplements, and avoid immobilization. Treat the underlying cause. For primary hyperparathyroidism, surgical referral may be indicated based on established criteria. Monitor calcium levels regularly. Severe hypercalcemia requires aggressive treatment. I teach the triple approach. First, intravenous saline for immediate volume expansion. Second, calcitonin for rapid but short-lived calcium lowering. Third, bisphosphonates for sustained effect. Think of it as saline rehydrates, calcitonin bridges, and bisphosphonates sustain. Let's examine each component. Intravenous isotonic saline is the cornerstone of initial therapy. Patients with hypercalcemia are invariably volume depleted due to the polyuria we discussed. Start with aggressive hydration, typically 200 to 300 milliliters per hour, adjusted for cardiac status. This enhances renal calcium excretion. Loop diuretics like furosemide should only be added after adequate volume repletion and mainly to prevent volume overload, not as primary therapy. Calcitonin is your rapid responder. It works within hours by inhibiting osteoclast activity and increasing renal calcium excretion. The effect is modest, typically lowering calcium by 1 to 2 milligrams per deciliter. The major limitation is tachyphylaxis. Effectiveness wanes within 48 to 72 hours due to receptor downregulation. Use calcitonin as a bridge while waiting for bisphosphonates to take effect. Bisphosphonates are the mainstay for sustained calcium lowering. Zoledronic acid is preferred due to superior efficacy and convenient single-dose administration. The onset is 2 to 4 days with peak effect at 4 to 7 days. Duration of action extends for weeks. Key considerations: adjust dose in renal impairment, and be aware of rare complications like osteonecrosis of the jaw and atypical fractures with repeated dosing. Let's compare our therapeutic options. For saline works within hours but only during infusion. Calcitonin also works in hours but lasts only 1 to 2 days before tachyphylaxis. Bisphosphonates take 2 to 4 days to work but last weeks. This is why we use them together. Saline for immediate volume correction, calcitonin for rapid bridging, and bisphosphonates for sustained control. Each has a specific role in the treatment timeline. Some situations require special consideration. Denosumab, a rank ligand inhibitor, is useful when bisphosphonates are contraindicated, such as in severe renal impairment. It's also effective in bisphosphonate refractory cases. Dialysis is reserved for life-threatening hypercalcemia with renal failure or when other measures fail. Use low-calcium or calcium-free dialysate. Glucocorticoids are specifically useful in vitamin D-mediated hypercalcemia and certain malignancies. Always treat the underlying cause. For primary hyperparathyroidism, parathyroidectomy is curative. For malignancy, treat the cancer. Hypercalcemia often indicates advanced disease. For granulomatous diseases, glucocorticoids reduce 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D production. For vitamin D intoxication, stop the source and consider glucocorticoids. For medication-induced hypercalcemia, discontinue the offending agent. The specific therapy depends on the etiology. Let me leave you with key clinical pearls. First, always correct calcium for albumin or check ionized calcium. Second, PTH is your diagnostic pivot point. Third, primary hyperparathyroidism and malignancy cause over 90% of cases. Fourth, severe hypercalcemia is a medical emergency. Fifth, remember the triple approach: saline, calcitonin, bisphosphonates. And finally, always treat the underlying cause for definitive management. To summarize, when you encounter hypercalcemia, first confirm and classify severity. Check PTH to guide your differential. For severe cases, initiate the triple therapy while pursuing the underlying diagnosis. Mild cases may be managed conservatively while addressing the cause. This systematic approach will serve you well in clinical practice. Thank you for your attention. Remember, when in doubt, check the PTH. I hope this lecture has given you a solid framework for approaching hypercalcemia. Now, let's open the floor for questions and discussion.